Well, I guess this is it. Let's go kill a princess.
Everybody say hey!
With only one episode left, we finally get the backstory on how Dr. Phosphorus once was a major villain in the streets of Gotham before getting stopped by the Dark Knight himself. Meanwhile, we see the other commandos trying to survive the night as Flag tries to survive his near-death encounter with Clayface. Time to recap and talk some DC and break down and discuss episode 6 of Creature Commandos, spoilers ahead. Now we open this penultimate episode with a flashback, and immediately you can tell that we're in Gotham by the look and the tone within seconds as we see Dr. Phosphorus jumping out of a moving van, but he's immediately caught by the goons of the Batman villain Rupert Thorne, as we'll discuss more of this flashback in a moment. We cut back to the present day where we see the commandos are still on the run from the princess's knights. Now, briefly before we move on, I have to shout out the team behind the scenes on this opening sequence of this episode, from the camera angle to the look of the city to, of course, the musical cue, making you feel like you're watching an episode of the Batman animated series. I love the homage that they paid within this opening sequence. Now, back at the palace, we see the princess still has orders in place to have the commandos either found, stopped, or killed. We find Nina and the bride have found each other and find themselves hiding in the brothel. Here they take refuge under the bride, forcing the head mistress to allow them to hide out from the knights. Meanwhile, we see Rick Flag Sr. has been dropped off at the hospital, but he isn't looking too good. He has his broken back, he has internal damage, and he's in a coma. As we see Waller and John are demanding answers to what or to who did this to him. As they quickly piece together and realize that Flag and Eric must have worked together, and Eric is planning to stop the mission to kill the princess as they set their sights on stopping him. Speaking of Eric, we see he's taking over a plane and forces the pilot to take him back to Pokolistan. Now let's take a moment and focus on the backstory from the doctor as we see him hiding out in a random family's house where he comes across a little girl, but he also comes across some photos of that family that remind him of his life before his accident. Now we get the flashbacks to seeing him with his kid, but we also see him get into a disagreement with his wife, who's trying to stop him from working with the bad guys in order to fund his work that he's given the opportunity to stopping cancer with the nuclear fusion treatment. Now here's where things get really dark, as it appears that those concerns from his wife led him to complicating his partnership with the not-so-good guys, who we learn is Rupert Thorne, and unfortunately the doctor's decision led to him finding his wife and child murdered. As Thorne sets his plans in motion to framing him as the killer, as we see him getting rid of the loose ends by getting rid of the doctor by his own work. We find out that Rupert Thorne is upset with the doctor because he wasn't sticking to their agreement by falsifying his results, and he did this after learning that they were giving his results to an overseas fascist regime. Now this decision isn't good for Thorne's overseas relationship and business overall, and for this, we see him throw the doc in the fusion machine, and the story will go, he killed his family and he took his own life after. As we watched them cut the machine on, and to me this felt kind of similar to the birth of Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen, as we see his body transform and his skin burns off from the radiation, creating a monster. Now cutting to what's going on with Weasel in this episode, we see him in the woods and he comes across a pack of wolves and makes friends. Now back with the bride and Nina, the bride and the woman who runs the establishment get into a disagreement over what and how the bride handles using her body to kill, but this conversation is ended by the arrival of the Crack brothers. As one of the brothers start trouble with one of the women, we find out that they're metahumans. As the bride stops one of them from continuing to hurt the woman, and this leads to a fight in which we see the bride killing one of the brothers by shooting them in the head, and then taking the other one heart out of their chest and crushing it. Now back with the Weasel, we see him waking up to a dream in which he remembers a little girl who died in the fire, and he sees the resemblance between that little girl and the princess, and it seems that this is the motivation for the Weasel to stop what's coming to the princess as he leaves behind his new pack of wolf friends. Now, to my understanding, that scene did not confirm that the little girl and the princess are the same person, because how would you go from almost dying in a fire in America to then being adopted and becoming the princess of a country? Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but we'll see what the reveal of all that is. But to me, I understood that scene as the idea of them both having shown the Weasel kindness, and I think he wants to protect those who treat him nicely, which is what the princess did, and we saw how Weasel came to the princess defense sense when we saw Cersei attacking her back in episode 2, which leads me to believe that the Weasel will not allow the Commandos to kill her as ordered. He wasn't able to save the little girl, but now he has the opportunity to save the princess. Now, going back to the decision of the Weasel leaving his pack of friends, I thought that was a nice little character moment because it's probably rare for the Weasel to find a sense of belonging, but it does go to show that he's willing to leave behind this potentially new friendship in order to save the princess. Now, back with the newly vengeful fueled doctor who has his new abilities, it seems to me that the radiation may have altered his personality as we see him laughing his way to avenging the death of his family and the death of who he used to be. As we see him arriving to the Thorns' house, where we don't see it, but we can see the news breaking that the doc killed Thorn, but also his entire family. But that's not it, as we get this cutscene of him killing all of Rupert's men that was involved in his accident, and he brutally kills them and becomes the villain that he once feared. Now, to me, during this montage, it seemed that the doctor had replaced the pain of losing his family by unleashing pain onto others and completely destroying the men that he used to be, and proving, unlike some of the other members of the Commandos, that he is indeed a villain and he is indeed a monster. From here, we see him take over Rupert Thorne's empire and begins wreaking havoc on Gotham. Now, we get this nice little Easter egg of the Doctor and his crew going inside the Ice Lounge, which I'm assuming is just the Iceberg Lounge from the Batman universe, which is normally a hangout spot for Batman villains, including the Penguin. As we watch the Doc and his crew on the dance floor, as it's cut between us seeing all the crimes he's committed over a period of time. As he thinks he's on top of the criminal world of Gotham, we see the lights cut off and he looks up and he sees the Batman. Now let's talk about my favorite moment of this episode, being a Batman fan that I am. Now obviously we don't know who's going to be playing the Batman in the DCU. He had no speaking lines, there was no one credited for playing the character, but looking back at those glorious 2 seconds of screen time, it would appear to me that he was rocking the classic gray and blue outfit, which is slightly different from the one we saw him wearing in the Future Nightmare sequence. Now selfishly, I wish we could have got a sequence of seeing the Batman taking down Dr. Phosphorus, but maybe we'll see that in a flashback sequence in maybe live action form. But again, after seeing Clayface in last week's episode and now knowing that Batman was the one that caught Dr. Phosphorus, this just gives me more proof that the DCU's Batman will definitely be the most fantastical Batman we've seen in live action. Now also, I'm curious to hear you all's thoughts in the comments below. With the recent delay of the Batman Part 2, there's been rumors spreading around that Robert Pattinson may be in line to be the DCU Batman. Now me personally, I prefer to have 2 separate Batmans, one in Matt Reeves' universe being an Elseworld, and of course one being the DCU with James Gunn, but I can understand maybe some of the concern of having 2 different Batman running at once. Let me know if you all would like to see Robert Pattinson's Batman be the DCU Batman and scrapping the idea of the Brave and the Bold and combining the Matt Reeves Batman with the DCU, or like me, do you prefer them to be separate? Let me know your thoughts about that in the comments below. Now, we end this episode with Waller by Flag's bedside as he recovers, and she's awaiting answers to find out who put him in the hospital and how it connects to the larger picture. Now, to me, this level of concern by Waller may be the most human thing that we've seen her do from her entire experience in the DCU, and to me, it shows the level of respect that they have for one another. As we see Eric arriving home to stop the Commandos, but also to see his bride, we see the princess has her army of knights fully prepared for the coming attack from the Commandos, who, by the way, are all together at the end of this episode again, and they have their sights on the palace to prepare to kill the princess, leading into the finale. Which, speaking on the finale, based on all the other characters getting backstories told, it's safe to assume that we're going to get Nina's backstory, and it may show that she may have a darker side rather than the nice side we've seen of her all season long. I would expect a violent reunion between Eric and the bride, and of course I expect some all-out action between the princess versus the Commandos. I would guess that Rick Flag Sr. will be sidelined in the finale, but maybe someone will give him a shot of adrenaline or something to temporarily wake him up to join the fight. But whatever happens, I do want to go back to Frank Grillo saying a while ago that next time we see him in Peacemaker, he's going to be the head of Argus. So I don't know if that's going to take place after Superman that he becomes the head of Argus, or after the orders that we see Waller give to kill the princess, and maybe it's going to be a failed attempt to do so. Maybe that's the last straw for her. Maybe that's when she gets fired, and that's where Rick Flag Sr. is going to become the head of Argus. Which, speaking of the princess, will she die next week, or will she survive? Will we we see Cersei and maybe see other heroes and villains appearing in the finale of next week. Now overall, I thought this was another decent episode, kind of similar to how I felt about last week. There was nothing groundbreaking in the episode besides of course seeing Batman, and I just thought that the Doctor's backstory wasn't all that emotionally damaging. Now even though his intentions behind his research were good, I didn't necessarily see him as like this misunderstood person turned to a metahuman gone wrong. Now again, I would assume that the nuclear fusion messed up his mental state, but deep down, I feel the violent tendencies that we saw in the episode was probably deep down inside of him, and he was finally able to let it out once he got his new abilities, and he took that opportunity to really do what he wanted to be this whole time, which maybe is and ultimately a big bad villain. So before we wrap up, as always, check out my reactions to the biggest moments of this week's episode. You can find those on the channel now. So more importantly, I want to know what you all thought of this episode. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you think about the backstory of the Doctor? What did you think about seeing Batman? Who do you want to see be the Batman in the DCU? And what do you all hope to see in the finale next week? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. Thank you all as always for watching this week's breakdown. I'll be back to discuss the finale next week, and if you all enjoyed this video, definitely hit the like button, share this video, and also consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. You all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.